So, hello everyone, and thanks for inviting me to this event. As this title suggests, and also as Theo said, this will be a kind of a general critique of mostly my experiences from EU bioeconomy, but I have some recent insights from the Amazon 4.0 initiative from Carlos Nobre and ABC, which stands for Amazonian Bank of Codes in Brazil. So I will have one slide in the end to kind of reflect what we have found in that research related to this. Okay, so the arguments that I will make are based on this project Just Globe, which stands for Justice and Politics in Global Bioeconomy. It's my Academy of Finland funded our research fellowship, and I'm working with 3 postdoctoral researchers. So we are interested in the implications, justice and power asymmetries related implications of what we call an emerging global bioeconomy. And we have case studies of the EU bioeconomy policy, like a kind of policy debates and level, and then also more specific bioeconomy related initiatives and projects in Ghana and Laos. So these are some of the assumptions that we are critiquing or kind of looking into. I'm not going to read them. I'm just going to say that we have published some of the research from this project is published in 2 special issues on justice and power in bioeconomy. And you have those 2 links, and some other outcomes of the project are also can be found in the 2 of the last links, where one is just ResearchGate and the other one is from my work profile. Okay, so the central message, which I have broken down in a few points that I'm going to argue today, is this: that decarbonizing and transitioning to fossil-free economy and energy system is needed and is important, but it is also only one part of the story, one part of the solution. Considering the situation in which we are now, which with all the, I think we are all aware, with all the emergencies, not climate only, but biodiversity, and so on and so forth, inequalities and so on, we really need to shrink the size, just talking about the size of the economy in the high income countries. So those would be the OECD, for instance, but also to reinvent the aims, the objectives, and also the way we do economy. So to reinvent it and to kind of move towards a fairer and more just ways of and aims of the economy. So my argument is that bioeconomy, as currently designed and imagined at the EU level, does not question, and therefore we cannot possibly hope that it could address the exploitation, expropriation, and extractivism of human, but also other than human lives, their creativity, their productivity, on which it relies. It also cannot question and therefore cannot address the racial, gender, and other types of oppression and discrimination that are rooted in, but also importantly, that are required for the global extractive capitalist system and the growth imperative. Now, what I mean by growth imperative is that basically the system requires economic growth just to kind of stay afloat. And, you know, economic growth has to be there by all costs, at all costs, sorry. So you would be at least partly right to say that this critique holds for any other policy proposal that is out there, at least the mainstream ones. But we have to be clear about this and call out these hegemonic or more mainstream and prominent policies for the blind spots and you know, their kind of support, in my view, for business as usual while claiming to be transformative. Now, bioeconomy, as defined by the EU, encompasses all sectors that produce, use, process, or rely on biological resources. So as defined by the EU, it is a kind of really all-encompassing concept and idea that defines the way we produce and consume, and therefore by definition, the way how societies and economies are organized. So it's also, sorry, my I had a little bit of flu last week, so my voice is a bit. So it also it means that it sets the norms and principles how we live, right? So that being said, there are different versions and narratives about the EU bioeconomy, and they tend to, or we can present them in a chronological order of how the policy have been evolving over time. So this figure is from the report that we recently published, maybe 2 months ago, with the European Commission Joint Research Center. And the idea here is to present that the origin of the EU bioeconomy policy as a whole is really firmly based on what also Emiliano was talking about, this EU's efforts to develop biotechnology research and innovation that are dating back from 80s. And this is often referred as biotechnology or knowledge-based bioeconomy. Now, this kind of approach, techno-scientific approach, remains really strongly in the present in both of the subsequent EU bioeconomy strategies, even if new aspects have been, subsequently added. So, for instance, in first we have the aspect of substitution of fossil fuels and other non-renewables with biological renewable materials, and this version would be is known as bioresource bioeconomy, and it kind of corresponds with the first bioeconomy strategy of 2012. Then in the last bioeconomy strategy, which is called sustainable bioeconomy, because the previous strategy was criticized for the assumption that we can simply substitute non-renewables with renewables / biological materials, and the assumption that is kind of there behind that we have super unlimited availability of, and by we I mean EU, availability of resources. So the strategy was reviewed, and therefore, at least rhetorically, the concerns about limited nature resources and circularity were added. So this is kind of sustainable bioeconomy, but nonetheless, in terms of really actual proposed measures and action, there is not much change. We have a lot of rhetorics in the first 1/3 of the strategy, but in the end, the measures are pretty similar, or when it comes to new measures, they are very soft, voluntary. Well, not to go into too much details, I have another slide that kind of shows the very thin changes in terms of really practice. So anyhow, so this was recognized also by the EU's bioeconomy progress report that was published, I think, last year, and which brings to question the issue of consumption. So now again, we can expect a new version, and perhaps adding the issues such as sufficiency or even justice, perhaps. And this report that is that you can find here is actually looking at those new visions that could be how the bioeconomy could be made more humane or just or sufficient. Okay, now I did change. Do you see the one that says literature insights? Yes, I hope.
Yes.
Okay, something went here a little bit strange, but I think now it's fine. So there are plenty of studies that are analyzing these two strategies, their pros and cons, and I'm not going to go through them. These are, for instance, 3 of them. There are others as well. You can check them out. We can come back to this if you want into the in discussion. But instead, I would like to move on and kind of clarify why I'm saying that this is not enough. So, in what follow, I will revisit some of the problems that we need to talk about in broad policies like bioeconomy. And the first of those issues is carbon gap. So this graph is from the latest IPCC report, and it shows that even if all the policies and commitments from the governments and corporations would be, put in action and fulfilled, which does not always happen, but even in that case, we are well beyond 2 degrees increase. We are, I think, 2.2 to 3.5 increase in the global temperature. So to sort of keep in some kind of safe space, we really need to drastically and dramatically cut down the emissions and not only count for, their decoupling of the economic activities. And such drastic reduction in emissions are not advocated by bio or green energy, green economy, varieties. So far, I think they are only advocated in degrowth and regenerative economy paradigms that aim at going beyond the economic growth as the key objective of the economy. The second and related issue is the carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions. The fact that it's not just about emissions, they are very much political. We need to talk about, in fact, about carbon colonialism and frame climate change as an atmospheric and climate colonization by a handful of high-income countries. These graphs are only about the emissions, and it's based on Jason Hickel's work, the first paper there that is cited. But similar figures are also similar. Picture is you can get about the resource overuse, so uses of materials, which is the reason number one for crossing other planetary boundaries. And the other two references are about resource use. So the countries in the global north, US, Canada, Europe, I think Europe as a whole, Australia and Japan collectively are responsible for as much as 92% of the total excess emissions. Now, excess emissions mean the emissions that are beyond the country's fair and sustainable share. So, meanwhile, the entire continents of Africa, Asia, including China and South America, are contributing, with only 8%. Even though most of the world population is based in these areas. So still to continue on the climate coloniality, I think this graph is really very illustrative of that issue. So the map shows responsibility on the top vis-a-vis vulnerability to climate change between different countries or regions of the world, and how this line cut pretty much across the colonial lines. And this, of course, reflects the larger systemic inequalities and existing unequal power, economic and trade relations between the global north and south. Sorry to still go on with this, but the issue is quite it cannot be just, taken as black and white. We also need to remember that carbon inequality is also relates to power and wealth inequality at an individual level. So not only people, let's say in US, UK, or Finland are equally responsible for the climate debt. So the graph shows, for instance, the population by income in relation to CO2 emissions, where globally, in average, the richest 10% emit close to half of the consumption-based emissions, while the poorest 50% of the global population would emit only about 10%. And to illustrate this per country, this is from the latest Oxfam emission inequality report. And this is an interesting figure that represents the issue in France. 125 billionaires fund X amount of tons of CO2 per year, which is equivalent of the annual carbon emission of France. So finally, the genocide, epistemicide, and killing of environmental and land defenders, which are mostly indigenous and other local communities, protecting their land from mining, for instance, mining for other things, but also for rare earth elements, for solar and electric vehicle batteries, but also land acquisitions for bio and agrofuels. So this violence is pretty high and increasing. And I also connected to epistemicide, which is about the knowledges and ontologies and cosmologies, the ideas of the worldviews of the people who dare to think differently and live differently. This kind of capital being also destroyed. So yeah, let's go on. So I basically argue that the change to an economy which does not address those issues is more more or less a cover-up strategy that protects the current state of affairs and those inequalities, systemic inequalities, systemic power relations, oppression, that are, thanks to which we have the economic growth that we have and the division of the growth that we have in the south and in the north and south. So here are 5 or 6 issues that add to that argument, and where I kind of will put here what the EU bioeconomy does not question or problematize, and what does that mean? So first, it does not question the economic system that is structurally or by design dependent on exponential economic growth, but instead, basically, it ensures that it continues by ensuring the growth it needs, or promising that the growth, the current growth will stay in place, substituting only the fossils with renewables. So it doesn't question the fact that growth, any growth, green or gray, increase material use and hence makes decarbonization more difficult, and contributes also to ecological destruction and social injustices, and especially perhaps in these new frontiers for new transitions to non-renewables, non-renewables. It perpetuates neocolonialism due to appropriation of land, biomass, and biological materials from the global south. It kind of hides those issues. It doesn't say this is good, but it doesn't deal with them. And in that case, kind of by promoting the idea of efficiency, the decoupling and techno-scientific solutions, it sort of shifts attention from those causes, from those root causes, from those problems, and it hides also some of the problems of decoupling and the fact that, for instance, the gains from saving the energy or resources are being kind of diminished by the economy-wide bound effect, which basically means that the things that you save in the economy that we have are again put in service of producing more or consuming more, even at the individual household level, and so on and so forth. And the number 3, it does not deal with the unequal responsibilities and exchanges, the inequalities between high-income countries and rich individuals and corporations, and what does that mean for the more poorer countries and especially communities that are made vulnerable and that are on whose labor and livelihoods are being put at cost on this development. Then also, it doesn't question the Western ontological and epistemic superiority. It's, in a way, this is promoted because we are, the bioeconomy is mostly about, well, first of all, it's a human superiority over the rest of nature, because the rest of nature is more or less put as a resource for the economy of the human, but also there's the techno-scientific solutions, which are mostly associated with Western epistemic ideas are promoted, and also the extraction and appropriation of indigenous knowledges, which I think, especially in the context of Amazonian Bank of Codes, is really visible, because the idea is there to place the indigenous knowledges in service of scientific knowledge, and in kind of with that aim to produce new markets for new products and profit from them. But who profits, right, is the question. So what is the alternative? I will just, I will draw from degrowth and global justice approaches that I've been interested in recently, and I will go quickly through them. So these are more kind of broad policies, and then I'll go a bit in more detail. So first, radical reduction of material and energy use in high-income countries. So there are empirical studies from Jason Hickel, from ecological economists at the University of Leeds and others. And there are the resources in the end that shows that bioeconomy and carbon capture, storage, and whatever is that standing for, the techno-innovation and decoupling, while important, cannot be implemented at a scale and in good enough time with the urgency we need to prevent the crisis, socio-ecological breakdown, but also the social costs of this transition. So again, like a second being radical scaling down of industrial production and overconsumption in the high-income countries, while supporting the global peripheries and the global south countries in their transition, which leads me to the third point, which is about just transitions or just transformations. That, among others, means recognizing the depth, the climate depth, and also reparations, paying for reparations and debt cancellation of the countries to international monetary funds, international monetary structures, but also to governments in the global north. A radical shift in aim and objectives of economy, again, from growth-oriented to well-being oriented, and radical distribution of power and wealth in different scales, like we were talking about inequality, so from within the country, but especially regions and north and south. Some of the policies in practice are the most promoted ones, being promoting sufficiency and expanding the life of products. Democratizing economies, so basically meaning having, instead of corporations and markets deciding what and how much needs to be produced, that people would have more saying in that. Scaling down the destructive sectors and elitist exclusionary lifestyles, and using that to scale up some of the regenerative or meaningful sectors and lifestyles, so promoting connection, community, but also public provision of healthy and uncontaminated food and water supplies, combined with strong social welfare policies, free healthcare and education, but also good quality housing, transport. So, I mean, using the productive capacities that we have now to other means and ends, redistributing the money, work, power. For instance, some of the most popular policies are in the universal basic income or care basic income, but also wealth taxation and introducing maximum total income, so salary, but also the general investments. Shorter working week, which would contribute to sharing of jobs, but also introducing climate job guarantee. And now these policies are sometimes seen as contradictory of one another, whether to have job or not. But I think that they can actually complement each other in a good way. And this is not a blueprint. This is all these policies need to be put in the context and need to be desired and to fit the places where they would be introduced. And also regenerative agriculture. There are many more of these policies. They have been dealt with, proposed by degrowth scholars. But sorry, I need. So this is the last slide, and it's about Amazon 4 initiative at ABC, Amazonian Bank of Coats. So I drawn two recent papers, which are on the bioeconomy in Brazil. One is from Ossi Olinahua and Markus Kruger, colleagues from Helsinki, who discuss the different visions or versions of bioeconomy in Brazil. And the second one is a paper in review with Maria Fernanda Guevara and another colleague, Mikhail, from Brazil. So these are some of the risks that these two papers outline in relation to attracting, like what are the risks if you attract international investments for research and business within Amazon, like for instance, what is proposed with the fourth revolution, industrial revolution. So ontological violence, basically the fact that if we frame the long-standing indigenous and traditional practices and economies as bioeconomy, means sort of imposing a foreign logic and a model on top of the indigenous ones. In that way, you kind of putting the later ones as a subordinate or less important to the former. But also this relates to the changing of the local people's visions and their place in their relations to other species and the rest of creation people, indigenous people would say, or the rest of nature, the rest of environment. This in turn, of course, changes their cosmologies or ontologies or their understandings about their role and position in the world. This might be a bit too too philosophical, but I think you do follow me. Second being the epistemic violence and knowledge appropriation. So epistemic violence is basically what is meant is that the first, it relates to the hierarchy between scientific and indigenous knowledges, and describe the situation where indigenous knowledge, like in this case, are put in service of scientific knowledge and used for creating new products and new markets. And this knowledge appropriation is quite people were really, not only indigenous people we interviewed, but also others were bringing up quite a lot. Then violence against other than humans. So it's not only about the changing of human populations and changing in their way of living, but also other than human populations and the ways they coexist with people, the way the entanglements that are there, which are very crucial for, keeping this coexistence and the biodiverse lifestyle. Then number 4, new institutional settings, because attracting international investment, as we know, always require different property rights, laws, institutions, which of course in turn imply transforming the social relations, the labor relations, power relations, and eventually the green grabbing and commodification, because we could this kind of development programs or investments help penetrate into the deeper Amazon, where much of the Amazonian modern human life and relations is not yet commodified. So I have, I think, 3 slides with references. So that is all. Thank you for your attention. I hope I am